Welcome. My name is Alicia Brozny, and this is my research on retention factors of Indigenous students in higher education. I'd like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the traditional territories of the people of Treaty 7 in southern Alberta, which includes the Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3. I recognize the decolonization of the lands I walk on and the preservation of the sacred is the way to truth, healing, and hope for the future. So, for the purposes of this research, the term Indigenous will include all First Peoples of Canada, the US, Australia, and New Zealand, and higher education includes institutions such as universities, colleges, and technical schools. It's been widely reported in the literature that Indigenous people are the most underrepresented population in higher education with low retention rates. In 2011, Statistics Canada reported that 9.8% of Indigenous adults had a university degree compared to 26.5% of non-Indigenous adults in Canada. The reason for this gap is far too complex to explain in a video of this length. However, we do know that lower educational attainment is directly connected to higher levels of poverty and low employment, which only further contributes to this gap between Indigenous people and non-Indigenous people of Canada. The current literature is also very heavily deficit-based and lacks a framework to help improve Indigenous student retention. My research addresses this with a scoping review that ultimately results in the creation of a framework. It was important that the articles included in this review showcase the voices of Indigenous students. So we wanted to know what are the factors of retention for Indigenous post-secondary students according to the empirical literature. We took this approach, PRISMA, to identify our articles, and PRISMA is the preferred reporting items for systematic reviews and meta-analysis. So here we recorded how many databases we searched, which databases we searched, how many articles were screened, and then how many articles eventually were included in our study. And Prisma helps to increase our methods transparency if there is someone who ever wants to go back and recreate our study. To analyze the articles, we used a method called content analysis. This is where we draw inferences from relevant data. So our relevant data here, for example, would be the journal articles. I reviewed them all, read them, looked for relevant themes to student retention, and then after coding all 120 articles, we conceptualized the most common themes into a framework. So this is our framework on Indigenous student experience. Three major themes came from the literature, which were self-factors. These include things that someone would identify within themselves, such as sense of belonging and cultural identity. Family and community factors are things that are outside of us, that influence us directly or indirectly, such as if we have family support while going to school or not. And then arguably the most interesting factor is institutional factors. Institutional factors encompass the people within the institution, the faculty, the staff, the spaces, whether or not there's space specifically for Indigenous students, and then culture. Is there cultural safety? How is the curriculum taught around Indigenous peoples? And this is the most interesting factor because it's the one we as an academic community have the most influence over. And it's our intention with this framework to help guide higher educational institutions on the needs and wants of Indigenous students, and our hope that they'll utilize the framework to create policy to improve the retention of their Indigenous students. Our work is not done. We hope to further strengthen our framework by having it reviewed by current Indigenous students to see what we got right and what we may have to improve. Now I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you for listening to this video, as well as a special thanks to my supervisors, Dr. Adam Murray and Melanie Greer. Without their guidance and contributions to this project, it would not have been possible.